Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the June 6, 2017 Borough Board meeting at Brooklyn Borough Hall. We don't have quorum. I'm hopeful that we will get quorum this time around, but we will start the meeting accordingly. And when we get quorum, then we'll move to adopt the minutes and take a vote. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Ingrid P. Lewis Martin. I am the Senior Advisor to Brooklyn Borough President Eric L. Adams, and I welcome you to our Brooklyn Borough Board meeting. I will ask that anyone who is speaking, please speak into the microphone, state your name, where you're from, so that when we record you, we have it for our records. So, on the agenda tonight, we have a resolution on the Flatbush Caton Market sales presented by New York City Economic Development Corporation, a presentation of the administrative trials and hearings on the New York City Criminal Justice Act, a presentation regarding a proposed zoning text amendment to limit the sightings of self-storage facilities in the city's industrial business district to those granted a special permit by the City Planning Commission. Last on the agenda, a presentation by the Prospect Park Alliance on Lefferts Historic House and Pathways for the Northeast Perimeter renovation. So we cannot adopt the minutes, so we'll pass. We would have to adopt 2 minutes, April and May. So when we have an opportunity, we will revisit that. Tonight's first agenda item is to authorize the proposed land sale of the Flatbush Caton Market pursuant to Section 38B4 of the New York City Charter of the property located at 794 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn, block number 5063, lot 58. We will move on to the next item, hopefully.
So you want to go in the order? This is on page 9.
Yeah, I'm going to go. Thank you. So hopefully we will have Board 14 present and the prerequisite number of council. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. And the prerequisite number of council members in order for us to vote on that. So as my colleague, I have 2 colleagues who are joined with me this evening. Most of you should know Richard Berrick, who is our guru of land use, and our director of policy, Ryan Lynch. So we will proceed on to item number 2. I would like to welcome Mr. Karen Houlihan. Please come to the podium, state your name and title for the record.
Good evening, my name is Kieran Houlihan. Is that loud enough? Sorry
Sure
about
good.
that. I took her words to heart. Thank you very much for letting me address you. My name is Kieran Houlihan. I'm the ombudsperson pro se clerk for the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings. The Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings is New York City's administrative municipal court. It's also the largest municipal administrative court in the world. This year, 2017, we're going to hear about 800,000 cases. In 2018, we expect to get close to or over 1 million cases. Those of you who may have had some dealings with oath, as we call ourselves, has to do with any one of 26 different agencies that issue summonses, among those Buildings Department, Parks Department, Sanitation, Transportation, Fire Department, and more. But the purpose of me being here today is to explain to you first and foremost that oath is an independent court system. Much like civil and criminal court, our judges, which are called hearing officers, are truly and completely independent from the agencies that write summonses, which is something that has been steadfastly worked on and was finally accomplished a little over a year ago. On June 13th of last year, in 2016, the New York City Council passed a law, or a series of 8 laws, called the Criminal Justice Reform Act. Those laws go into effect June 13th, next Tuesday. Now, those laws were passed for the simple fact that for far too many years, many of the young people, or just people in general in Brooklyn and around the city, would receive criminal summonses for offenses that are really not serious enough to require criminal treatment. And the way it works now, for all interactions you have at the police department, they have 3 options. One is arrest, one is a desk appearance ticket, which has the same functionality of arrest, except you can go home and sleep that night. And the third is the C summons, or a criminal summons, which bids you to come into court sometime in the future. All of these leave a person with the potential for some sort of collateral consequence because of meeting up with the criminal justice system, including those C summonses. So last year, when these 8 laws were put into effect, these 8 bills were passed and signed into law, they effectively gave the police department a 4th option for a number of offenses, the vast majority of which are going to fall under the Parks Department, or what I'm liking to say, the timing is perfect, hot time, summer in the city, it all goes into effect June 13th. But it also encompasses open container of alcohol, urination in public, and some of the sanitation offenses such as littering, throwing out, sweeping your refuse into the street, and things like that. The beauty of what the law has done is it's given the police department an option that is non-criminal. And the way the police department is going to enforce this, or the way they're going to issue these tickets, these summonses, is that it's going to be their first option for these items, these offenses. What it's going to do is I think it's going to make New York City a friendlier place. It's going to make interactions with the police department less fraught, because if you understand the numbers, in 2013, we spiked with the highest number of stop and frisks in our city's history, and that's been steadily declining. In 2006, we had the highest number of summons issues, and that's been steadily declining, and yet crime is also declining, and which I'm sure all of you are aware of. The key to all this is that it's not taking the offense away. People who pee in the streets or walk around with an open container should face some sort of a consequence. It's just not going to be criminal, and it's not going to leave someone with a potential for a permanent mark on their record and affecting their ability to get into a university or get a job or even keep a job, or, God forbid, come back into the country if they're a naturalized citizen. One of the benefits of all of this as well is that at oath, when we deal with these things, once a person has taken care of their matter, we're going to expunge any information from the record so that federal authorities, other authorities, or even credit reports or anybody of that nature, employers, they can't search our records for that. An additional benefit that we have moving forward by coming to oath is, unlike criminal court for the C summonses, we are going to be able to institute or give community service in lieu of a fine by simply asking for it. So if a respondent appears at oath on one of these summonses and asks to do community service, they'll be given that option. And given the fact that most of these things have to do with the outdoors and the general public and our shared spaces, it kind of makes some sense. And depending on the level of fine, which, by the way, have been lowered for these offenses also, because oftentimes people that are getting these tickets are people that are poorer, and now they're just getting hit with what is effectively a non-legislative tax. They're being lowered, and they're being given this opportunity of community service. And to do that, we've partnered with the Center for Court Innovation. Many of you may know who they are because they're the ones that help run the Red Hook Community Courts, Midtown Community Courts, and others. And they have a demonstrated understanding of how to implement community service while at the same time being respectful and empathetic towards the respondents that appear. Now, oath, we also have advantages that you don't necessarily have for criminal summonses. There are 2 criminal summonses where you don't have to necessarily go to court, you can merely mail that in, and that's urination in public and open container. Oath has that opportunity, but we do that for all cases, and not just for the Criminal Justice Reform Act cases. It even goes for buildings department cases, fire department cases, DOIT, Department of Information, Telephone, and Technology, I think is what it stands for, and all other agencies, you can simply mail that in. Because God forbid you have a summons for something that's somewhat minor, why should you also miss a day of work? We've also instituted the ability for someone to do it over the phone, and it can be done online. And beginning in September, we're going to have experimental night and weekend hours at our Brooklyn location at 9 Bond Street. So the main takeaway from all of this is that we've been tasked by this city, by the city council and the mayor, to be the administrative court that handles these summonses. We think that the police department is going to, based upon their guidelines, be issuing to us first, and we're going to be getting a large number of them. We're prepared for them. We have 500 hearing officers that we can move around the different boroughs so that people won't have to wait for very long. And that if you can't take a day off, you can come at night, on a weekend, or do it online, by phone, and by mail. So that is the point of what I'm bringing this out, and it does go live on June 13th. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
I am Barrington Barrett. I'm the chair of Community Board 17. My question is, could you give us an example of the C summons that is issued to a nightclub, and how does that affect?
So a C summons issued to a nightclub right now would be under unreasonable noise, which I have to stretch my brain here. Right now, a nightclub would get a C summons. Nightclub is not an individual, so therefore that C summons is not available to come to oath, because oath is to human beings. It's for personal activity. It's not for business activity. But that C summons would be for unreasonable noise under the administrative code, and that would go to criminal court and or potentially to oaths, depending on what agency writes it. I believe if the New York Police Department writes it, it does go to criminal court as a C summons. But I think if Department of Health or DEP write it, it comes to oath. The effect is somewhat different because the business is not facing potential for criminal liability if they come to oath. But the truth of the matter is if you go to the criminal court, it's effectively just a fine and they're not addressing what the issue is. Any other questions? Okay.
Hi, Barry Spitzer, Community Board 12.
Yes.
I heard that the oath is taking over sanitation tickets from ECB.
I'll address that. So, yes and no. ECB is the Environmental Control Board. It's a group of agencies that was formed under the Lindsay administration. The history behind it is very interesting if you ever felt like diving into a pile of paper. But it was effectively created for a number of reasons. Number one, it was the big thing in the 70s, create a board for this and a board for that. But it also was allowed the city to bail themselves out of a fiscal crisis by being able to bond or monopolize the potential future fines and be able to bond that. The problem with ECB was that the agencies that were writing the tickets were effectively judge, jury, and executioner. So ECB folded into oath a number of years ago, but the ECB terminology in reference to oath is kind of a legacy thing that's still around. Oath took that over years ago, and it's no longer, the tribunal is oath. The agencies that write the summonses come to oath. Those agencies separately form the, the board of the Environmental Control Board, and the chief judge and commissioner of oath is the head of that Environmental Control Board. So, but in theory, you're right. That is what's going on. Everything you used to know as ECB is now oath, but it was done a number of years ago. And same with Taxi and Limousine Commission. Up until about 3 or 4 years ago, Taxi and Limousine Commission was judge, jury, and executioner, in a worse way because it was just one agency. The same with Department of Consumer Affairs, which was flipped over sometime this summer. And the same goes with Department of Health, which occurred sometime early last year. So right now, there's 26 agencies that write summons to oath. The hearing officers that hear that have nothing to do and don't work for, not influenced by the agencies, so they're truly an independent and impartial hearing officers that hear the cases.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Houlihan?
Yes, sir.
With the new law that came down from the mayor's office about noise control, would these summonses fall within that portfolio?
For what control? I didn't hear that.
There was a new law that NYPD cannot issue any summons for the noise that is being, if a neighbor can call about the noise going on. And you said earlier that these summonses represent sound.
Well, so under the Criminal Justice Reform Act, there's a thing called unreasonable noise, which falls under the Parks Administration rules. I think it's 56 RCNY, something, something, something. Those are now in the Criminal Justice Reform Act, which gives the people the potential for lower fines, no potential for criminal collateral consequences or being the criminal system, albeit just the summons system. And it also allows for the individual to do community service over a fine. I think that's more along the lines of boom boxes or people using megaphones in a park. When there's a rally and you didn't get a permit, you can get in trouble for not having the permit. You can also get in trouble for unreasonable noise. The issue when you're talking about the nightclubs, I'm making an assumption to a certain degree. Yeah, the car alarms. That
Excuse me,
comes-
Barrington, could you please speak in the mic?
Okay, say for example, I'm playing loud music in my apartment, and my next door neighbor, for some reason, don't like the music I'm playing. They usually call the police, and you know, sometimes your music is being seized or whatever. I found out lately at a police council meeting that they could no longer enforce that was previously in effect. So I'm asking, does those C summons fall within that code of the sound?
So it depends, right? So C summonses don't come to oath at all. C summonses are not going away. There are certain laws that are under the Criminal Justice Reform Act, certain offenses where the police are giving an additional option. They can still write a C summons if it's something that the commissioner is directing them to do under certain circumstances. But for the Criminal Justice Reform Act cases, they have a fourth option, which is this administrative summons that comes to oath. With regard to noise vis-a-vis a noisy neighbor or somebody out in the stoop, that is not coming to oath because it doesn't fall under the parks. But there are cases going back decades that have been coming to oath, and they're not C summonses, but they're written by other agencies and not the NYPD. So in other words, the ones we would see from the NYPD are going to be new to us, and they're only really going to do with anything found happening in a park. Whether or not they're writing C summonses to criminal court or not writing in the criminal court for the noisy neighbor or the car alarm, if it's the New York City Police Department, we don't see them, and I can't really speak to it because I'm certainly not an expert on that. But other agencies have. Sanitation, believe it or not, writes noise violations that end up at oath.
Do we have any other questions from board members? Would any of our audience members like to ask a question? You're welcome to at this time. Okay, so on behalf of Brooklyn Borough President Eric L. Adams and the members of the Borough Board, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Houlihan,
Thank you
for
very
your
much, Ms. Martin.
presentation. You're welcome. The good news is that we have quorum to pass the minutes. We still are waiting for a couple of council members in order to move to item number 1. So if I may have some assistance, I would like to have someone make a motion to pass the minutes from the April 2017 Borough Board meetings. Could someone please? Could you please speak your name and make the motion into the mic?
Motion to approve the minutes of the April Borough Board.
Your name?
Teresa Scavo, Community
Thank
Board
you.
15.
Could someone?
Second, Ed Powell,
Thank you.
Ward 14.
May we vote? All those in favor, please say aye. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Okay, so April minutes have been approved. Excellent. I also need a motion to pass the minutes. May I have someone speak into the mic and move?
Shirley McRae, Board 2. I move to pass the minutes for the May 2nd, 2017 meeting.
Thank you. May I have someone please second?
Barry
motion?
Spitzer, Community Board 12, will second the motion.
Excellent, thank you. Move to vote. All those in favor? All those against? Any abstentions? May 2nd motion has been moved, passed, and approved. So the minutes are approved. Thank you kindly, and I want to thank all of the members who are here tonight to give us group quorum. To put on my glasses. You want me to go down to 5 instead of 3? Okay, thank you. Tonight's third agenda item, actually, is a presentation by the Department of City Planning regarding a proposed zoning text amendment to limit the sightings of self-storage facilities in the city's industrial business districts to those granted a special permit by the City Planning Commission. So my colleague, Richard Berrick, that's his fort, so I'm going to turn over this portion of the meeting to Richard, and he will fill you in accordingly.
Okay, so we have representatives of the Department of City Planning here tonight to explain their zoning text proposal, further regulating self-storage facilities in industrial business zones. This initiative part of the Mayor de Blasio's 10-point industrial action plan that targets these areas for employment growth and industrial innovation. During and after the presentation, the representatives will be able to take questions from Borough Board members and those in the audience. We're going to welcome Amanda Ayers. Please come to the podium, state your name for the record and your title, and she is joined by her colleague, Barry Dinnerstein.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Amanda Ayer. I work for the Department of City Planning. I was here in February, I believe, and I presented the self-storage text amendment for the first time. I don't know if all of you were here at that time, but we are back now, and we have referred out the proposed zoning text amendment. So this is to explain what this proposal is about, and also to let you know that every community board that we have referred this proposed text amendment out to can have a presentation over the next month, and I believe borough planners have reached out. You should have received a notice if this proposal affects you to have a presentation if you are interested in knowing more about this. So we're here because we understand that self-storage facilities have generated concern among communities and industrial advocates, and like many, the city wants to support industrial jobs in New York's industrial business zones. This proposal is aiming to strike a balance between protecting the city's most active industrial areas, but also allowing self-storage to site in some areas because we know that there is a real demand for this kind of use in New York City. The proposed self-storage text amendment affects community boards 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 16, 17, and 18 in Brooklyn. Sorry, how do I... Let me know if you need to hear that again. So this proposal originated in November of 2015. It was announced as part of the 10-point industrial action plan, as Richard explained, by the Office of the Mayor and the City Council Speaker together. It targets New York City's industrial business zones as areas for employment growth and industrial innovation. And the industrial action plan has 3 main objectives. The first is to protect the industrial neighborhoods and incentivize development. The second is to align city services to help industrial businesses start, grow, and thrive. And the third is to train the city's workforce to meet the needs of the industrial sector. So those were the 3 overarching objectives, and the limitations on self-storage fit into the first, where we are speaking of protections for industrial neighborhoods. The 10-point industrial action plan targeted New York City's industrial business zones. Why? It's because these are the most active industrial areas in New York City. We have looked at employment, and over 68%, or about 68% of the employment in these areas is actually industrial. And we know that these are areas that are critical for a range of different industries, such as wholesale, transportation, construction, warehousing, and manufacturing. And also, since 2010, these areas have experienced employment growth in industrial sectors, which is a turnaround from employment trends of previous decades where industrial jobs were decreasing. In that sense, the 10-point industrial action plan that was announced in 2015, and that's the basis for this text amendment, already builds also on a series of existing policies such as tax incentives, and you may be familiar with the industrial business service providers that provide services to businesses and IBZs, and these were already in place and are independent of this action. But all of these actions together are here to support economic and industrial growth and industrial businesses in IBZs. Based on the IBZs, we took the IBZ boundaries and created proposed designated areas and M districts. This means that we simply wanted to draw a distinction between the tax program that exists independently of the zoning action and our proposed boundaries. They are actually almost exactly the same as the IBZ boundaries, but exclude the airport properties. Otherwise, they are the same as the IBZs almost entirely. As you can see, the IBZs are located in the four boroughs, and only Manhattan does not have any industrial business zones. What is it about self-storage that is causing issues in our eyes? So the unregulated development of self-storage detracts from the city's long-term goals for IBZs or the designated areas. For one, it's a it is seen as a low job generating use, and from our calculations, every self-storage facility creates an average of about five jobs. It primarily serves households, so there is a certain percentage of clients that are businesses, but between 70 and 80% of the customers of self-storage facilities are typically households to store their household goods. And it also, and that is one of the main reasons that we are doing this, tends to occupy large sites along designated truck routes, along highways, and those are the kinds of sites we would typically like to see industrial businesses occupy, industrial businesses that are typically more job intensive than self-storage. Here are a few examples of self-storage facilities that have been developed, and I'm just noticing that there isn't a Brooklyn example on here, but there are also examples in Brooklyn, I can promise, that examples of development of self-storage where we think a more job-intensive industrial use could have located. We want to make sure that in the context of the existing economic development policies that are already in place in IBZs, the tax incentives, the IBZ service providers, that industrial businesses actually have an opportunity to locate on these sites. And as you can see, they're typically very large and they're located right next to highways, which would be an ideal location for a truck-dependent business, as many industrial businesses use trucks to transport goods. We also see that self-storage is in high demand, and it's expected to continue to grow over the next decades. In the last 10 years, there were in the last 7 years, there were 10 self-storage developments in the IBZs on sites larger than 20,000 square feet, and this represents, out of all of the new development on large sites, this represents a quarter of new development in IBZs. So it is a non-negligible chunk of development that is actually taking place in these areas that we would like to see reserved for job-intensive uses. A little bit of background on self-storage. So there are about 240 self-storage facilities in New York City. As you can see, they exist in all boroughs, and they are citywide. They are relatively distributed or relatively dispersed, but they do typically site along truck routes and highways where they have more visibility. Currently, self-storage facilities are classified as a warehouse, and they're permitted in C8 and M districts everywhere in the city. And about 1/4 of all existing facilities are located in the IBZs, or the designated M districts, which means that that is where we are proposing the restriction. Here's a map of Brooklyn. It shows, again, the self-storage facilities, the existing self-storage facilities, and the areas where we are proposing to restrict them, and the areas where self-storage would continue to be allowed. There are over 70 facilities in Brooklyn, and about 1/3 of them, 20 of them are in IBZs, so almost 1/3 of them are in IBZs. The areas in purple on this map, and there are more detailed maps on our webpage, both under the project description and also in the zoning text, which you have received a copy of, where you can see the detailed text maps of the areas where we are proposing a restriction. What we're proposing is a a City Planning Commission special permit for new self-storage facilities in these areas. We think that a case-by-case, site-specific review process will ensure that self-storage development doesn't represent a significant lost opportunity for the future siting of an industrial, more job-intensive business. And in crafting these regulations, we are trying to only we are making sure that only self-storage is subject to the special permit requirement, but not other types of warehousing. So warehousing would still be permitted, as well as moving companies, because they typically are much more job intensive, and it's a large part of what happens in the IBZs as well. Any special permit is generally granted, has specific criteria upon which a special permit may be obtained. In the designated areas and M districts, or the IBZs, self-storage development would be permitted by special permit on sites that are not appropriate industrial business locations. The City Planning Commission will have to make this decision, or will have to make this evaluation based upon a number of considerations, and these considerations are explained also in the zoning text. But the different considerations don't all represent findings. One consideration could be sufficient to grant the special permit, so not all of these points would need to be met in order to obtain the special permit, but just one of them could be reason enough if the City Planning Commission considered it significant to receive the special permit. But one of them is the zoning lot size. So the general thinking is that a large lot is usually better for an industrial business than a small site. And also, many self-storage facilities are conversions of existing buildings, so one would have to look at the existing building and what is its layout, does it have loading docks, does it have freight elevators, does it have column spacing that is adequate for industrial businesses. If it were missing some of those elements, it might not be a good industrial conversion, or it might not be used by an industrial business and could represent an adequate self-storage conversion. The City Planning Commission would also look at the proximity to truck routes. Are truck routes nearby? Is there easy access for an industrial business to access their truck routes? Or is it further away from truck routes, in which case it might be an adequate location for a self-storage facility? Furthermore, what does the local street leading up to the lot look like? Is the local street narrow? Is it wide? If it's narrow, it might have a hard time handling the truck traffic that could be generated by an industrial business locating there. Furthermore, other considerations would be the investment in comparable sites in the area. Are buildings vacant? Are they abandoned? Or are they occupied? Are they invested in? Has there even been new construction? So all of these are quite subjective, or are the discretionary findings that the City Planning Commission would need to look at. Finally, I'd also like to mention that they would consider the potential for conflict with existing surrounding uses. So, as you know, in some IBZs there are grandfathered residential facilities, or maybe community facilities, and in that case we would maybe rather not facilitate industrial development and have a self-storage site there, which has less potential for land use conflicts. Or also, if a proposed site is contaminated, has environmental issues, there might be an opportunity for environmental remediation that could be seized with a self-storage facility, with a self-storage development. So these are the different considerations we are proposing, but the City Planning Commission could also attach other considerations and requirements that would be related to the land use rationale. The process that we are proposing for an applicant for a self-storage development is the special permit application process, and this involves a pre-application process with the Department of City Planning that typically takes about 15 months to complete. It includes the land use and the environmental application, so there's an environmental review that needs to be conducted together with a special permit. Then it involves ULURP, which you're very familiar with, and it would include a community board, borough president, City Planning Commission, and City Council review, which is subject to call-up. But these are the steps that any future self-storage facility would have to go through in order to get permission to be built in these IBZs. Overall, we estimate that the process of obtaining a special permit takes about 2 years. The process for this proposed zoning text amendment, as I explained, it was first announced in 2015, and then in 2016, the Department of City Planning developed the proposal. We held a scoping hearing in March, so a couple of months ago, and then referred out the zoning text amendment on May 22nd. So it is now in the community board review process, and will return to the City Planning Commission once that time has elapsed. I'm very happy to take any questions from you now, but there is also an email address that you could write if you had any questions. It's selfstoragedl@planning.nyc.gov, and there's also a lot of information on our website regarding the proposal.
Thank you. So I have a few questions. If you could go to slide 9, actually, it'd be helpful for the context of the questions. So given that
The
there
one
is...
of Brooklyn?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So given that there is a scarcity of land for development in New York City, and the fact that self-storage would then remain as a right in roughly 60% of the area it's allowed in today, and within that 60% land area, there has been contemplation of rezoning. So I'll just point out on the map where it's possible, based on a rezoning, self-storage might not be allowed in the future. So, for example, in the Gowanus section, right, the northern section of Gowanus is being studied. The community board has been engaged with city planning in the M Crown area along Atlantic Avenue. Community Board 9 has been pushing for a rezoning preservation base, and obviously as part of any preservation rezoning, there is likely to be an upzoning. So some of the corridors that are part of the consideration will be along Empire Boulevard and perhaps Utica Avenue, and even Community Board 17 has been pushing for a preservation-based rezoning. So I'm working with the Community Board in terms of finding areas to upzone that board, and Utica, again, is another corridor that allows self-storage and could be contemplated for residential. So also, we've just recently in Community Board 2, there is a private sector application that was filed, which is a self-storage location on Tillery by Ingersoll Houses. So obviously, the intent of the applicant is to remove the self-storage there. So given some of these things that may eventually play out, how has the evaluation process considered or not considered those areas moving forward?
So with any proposed action, we look and study at the potential for impacts, and this is under the environmental review, under the potential for impacts of the proposed action. And in looking at how this could affect the self-storage industry, I think that's maybe where your question is headed. We considered where self-storage could site in the future, and we did contemplate any imminent rezonings, so rezonings from M to R, or like to from manufacturing to residential, or from manufacturing to commercial, not to MX, because that would still allow self-storage, that are known and that we think will be in front of the commission this year, and that are fairly certain. The planning framework has been developed. It has been announced that it's going to be, the planning framework for those studies is clear. So those we did take into account. Now, you mentioned Gowanus and Crown Heights, and I think a few other studies that have there has been a consultation process, and that has, you know, some are further along than others, but they're quite fresh, and that no recommendations have yet come forth from those studies. We don't think it would be adequate to speculate on the outcome of those potential rezonings. So we didn't consider those in terms of the environmental effects on the self-storage industry, the potential of those rezonings.
Right, and the other side, so the application in Community Board 2 would be something you might consider the loss of that facility.
Right.
And it's a double issue here. It's the issue of that when you have less areas where it's as a right, there might be more effort. If you go to actually slide 5 for a moment, when you have self-storage facilities allowed in less places as a right, on one hand, if they ultimately are rezoned, they need to go to 5. If you have areas that might eventually get residential rights.
I'm not sure which the number is actually.
There's one more. The other direction.
One more.
Perfect. So you see the context here. You have a very residential street. So this may be a C8 or M district next to perhaps our R district. And so the other side of the coin is when you start having more of these facilities coming into areas that are closer to residential, while on one hand there's the concern about the job which created the application, there are also neighborhoods that may not love this aesthetic. So that's just another side of the balance to consider moving forward.
In terms of self-storage facilities, existing self-storage facilities becoming other uses.
And also more self-storage facilities being on streets near residential situations because it's easier to place an as-right development if land's available than the predictability of a special permit.
Right.
So it cuts both directions.
Yeah. Yeah, there are two questions here. I mean, there are some examples, and CB2 is one of existing self-storage facilities that are being converted to other uses. There aren't many of those examples yet, but it's true that especially. So I can think of 2 or 3 maybe in Manhattan on the west side that used to be self-storage and are now either being demolished or converted to other uses. But it is a very marginal trend at this point. So it remains to be determined, I think, how much of that we might see in the future. In terms of looking at the balance of where self-storage currently sites, and I think that's why we don't estimate that there will be suddenly a drastic effect of concentration outside of the IBZs, is that currently about 1/4 of these facilities are within the IBZs, and on a yearly basis, about 2 self-storage facilities have been developed in IBZs on a citywide basis. So all IBZs taken together see about 2 new self-storage facilities every year. So while the special permit requirement would add a significant hurdle, it's a very profitable use, and we think that developers will still continue to seek some of those special permits to build self-storage facilities in IBZs. And if they don't, the number of self-storage facilities that is occurring currently in IBZs is 2 per year, which is a small number. So we don't think that areas outside of IBZs should necessarily experience a huge or notice a big difference in the with this proposed text amendment. But we're happy to hear thoughts if you differ with that conclusion.
Okay, thank you. And then also, there are a lot of lower density manufacturing zones around the city. We're in an era where, in fact, city planning has North Brooklyn study. We're looking at perhaps increasing floor area to many industrial districts. So this proposal is a little unusual in that
Oh, thank you.
as typically when you make a use legal non-conforming, you're not allowed to expand within the remainder of the zoning rights. This proposal calls for that. So question is, if it's going to be city policy to create more industrial opportunity in upzone areas, will those upzone rights go to the self-storage to fully utilize rights they don't yet even have today?
Yeah, we have considered that comment. It was also made at the time of scoping. We have considered that comment, and we don't think we can preclude actions in the future. So if in the future there is a decision to upzone any given IBZ or any M district, we can't at this point say that in the future there wouldn't be the right to for the self-storage development to utilize that increased FAR, and if in the future at that point of the action it would be considered inadequate, then that decision could be made at that point, essentially. I think there was one other thing I did want to say. Does that answer the question,
Yeah.
Rob? Okay.
So should there be a future rezoning, it's possible that might be addressed in a future zoning text or mapping action to affect self-storage at a later date.
If it is seen that is a necessary or that is an adequate action and there is a purpose and a need for that action, then we couldn't preclude that from being made, just as we couldn't preclude it from yeah, it could go.
So I have one more question before we turn over to Borough Board members. But given that self-storage facilities can really occupy multi-story configurations and therefore be able to adapt to be on smaller footprints, in terms of the environmental impact analysis, was there some assessment done to consider as an alternative in lieu of a special permit to have sites that are smaller be allowed to be as of right, perhaps at the same time where those sites that are smaller might be barred from being, say, a certain distance from transit or some of the other findings that are part of the special permit?
So since in throughout the environmental review, we see that there is the potential for a significant impact on the self-storage industry with this proposal. We contemplated an alternative, and that was also suggested in the scoping meeting by several speakers, to contemplate an alternative that would allow self-storage as of right under certain conditions. And one of them is a small site alternative that would allow self-storage as of right on sites that are smaller than 20,000 square feet. And so this is contemplated not as the proposed action, but as an alternative, which is up for discussion, essentially. So the only criteria from the special permit findings that we did consider as for the alternative was the site size, because that seemed like quite a straightforward as of right rule, essentially, if that were contemplated for to diminish the impacts on the self-storage industry. But that is not to say that there couldn't be others.
Thank you. So we're going to open this up to questions and comments from other members of the Borough Board or their representative, if anybody has.
Hi, Janice Morgan, Community Board 16. This presentation, you mentioned that there's a lot of material on the website about this, this amendment. Is this presentation included in the information on the website?
It is a presentation very similar to this one. It may differ in one slide. The presentation that I gave at the City Planning Commission at the review session is on the website, and it's if you go on the DCP webpage under projects, under citywide projects, the first one that pops up right now is the self-storage text amendment, and you have a project page, and I think pretty much towards the end it says public process, and there is a link to a PDF with the presentation.
Okay.
I'd be happy to show you where it is or email you the link if
I'm sure I can
if
find
that's
it.
helpful.
And also, in terms of the timeline for when you all will be making your rounds to community boards, how many community boards have already reviewed this process, and how much longer will you all be making these making your rounds to do the presentations?
Yes, so technically the review period is for 60 days, so that would go until July 30th. Unfortunately, the timing, I know it's not optimal, and that many of the community boards don't meet in July, which leaves effectively June. I think a few of the community boards, in Brooklyn specifically, I think only one or maybe two have had the presentation, and most of them are scheduled for either next week or the week after. But I think all of them should have been scheduled at this point.
Okay, because you all aren't scheduled to present at Community Board 16 in the month of June. You're not on
I think we should be. Okay, okay. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, if you don't make the presentations in the period allowed, is there going to be some sort of extension of the city planning review process to allow additional time for community boards to weigh in on this process?
If needed, I would see. Okay, let's have my boss say something.
Do we have any other questions from board members?
Hi, I'm Barry Dinnerstein, also from the Department of City Planning, and it was referred to all of the community boards that are affected by the action, and there's a 60-day period, and once that 60-day period ends, the time the community boards end, although we certainly would be glad to come and talk to the community board outside the time frame. we're going to check and make sure that Board 16 was contacted, but if not, we certainly will be available to discuss it, and this is going to be before the commission in the fall, so if you want, we could come and talk to you in the fall, if that works for you.
Okay.
I'd like to make a comment on that. It affects every community board in Brooklyn, because if you only meet with the IBZ boards and you're able to effectively persuade them to go along with your agenda, and then they change the zoning rights, they lower it, the standards, or I don't know if I'm using the right words, so Richard, you can help me out, but it will affect the other community boards adversely because, for example, CB9, I live in 9. Empire Boulevard is the poster child for storage, and it's not an IBZ. So if the other areas which have the right to have storages there is now diminished, CB9 and other CB boards who aren't normally storage facilities will have an increase. So you have to go to every single community board. It's important that every single community board is spoken to about it and that they have input, because it will affect every board one way or the other. I hope I explained it properly, because I'm not really sure about the terminology.
We understand, and we did consider that comment. That comment, I think, was raised at the scoping session, but a decision was reached to only send this and refer this to the boards that were directly affected by the special permit. Because nothing is changing in Board 9. Self-storage in those areas that where self-storage is permitted will continue to be permitted.
No, I know, but that's the point I'm making, Ryan, thank you. But what happens is that it will change in Board 9 by a de facto method. So every board needs to be communicated to and needs to have the presentation. And I don't see how the borough president, I'll speak with him, but I'm sure that he would want to ensure that all of his boards are given the information so that they all have input, because it will indirectly affect every single board. So whoever made that determination wasn't looking at it holistically. So, I'm just letting you know.
The borough board and the borough president can raise that issue with the city planning commission.
And we are raising it. All right, cool.
We can take that back.
And all board members, right, have voting rights at the borough board. So those boards that you're not presenting to, we're going to be asking them to weigh in on this proposal.
That's fine.
So do we have any other questions from board members?
Just if they can, once again, the boards who are directly affected by this?
Yes.
It would be easier for them to tell you the boards that aren't affected by it. I'm not telling you what to do, Barry, but it would be easy if they told you the boards that aren't affected by it.
I can do both.
Mm-hmm.
So the boards that have IBZs and where we're proposing the self-storage special permit is board, and it's not the entire board, and it's not all M and CA districts within these boards. It's just these certain designated areas, right? But these boards have those areas as Board 1, Board 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 16, 17, and 18.
And for the other boards,
Half of our boards.
if you have a C8 district or a manufacturing district, you have sites that allow self-storage. If you do not have a C8 or an M in your board, then you are not affected either way within the context of the locations within your district.
No, Miss, could you please speak into the mic and say your name? Thank you.
Could you please repeat the boards?
Yes, Board 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 16, 17, and 18 in Brooklyn.
Thank you.
They are affected.
I have a question, please, of the presenters.
Please, yes, state your name. and-
Shirley
Thank
McRae,
you.
Chair, Community Board 2. Maybe I misunderstood what you said, but when Board 16 asked you if they don't receive the presentation before the deadline, did I understand you correctly to say that they could do it later? So does that mean you will stop the clock? Because community boards only have 60 days. So if they do not get the presentation, will you stop the clock?
We will not stop the clock.
That's what I wanted to make sure that
But
everyone here
We're certainly willing
understood.
to come and discuss the action with the board when the board has time to schedule it. So we could talk to the board in the fall, but we're not going to stop the clock.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that was understood.
However, this is a text change.
Yes.
So the commission, unlike a ULURP, they're not on a clock. So even after they do their public hearing, based on how they're digesting information, they may not respond right away with a reaction. So for example, a board could provide information in September, feed it to staff at city planning, and it could be still brought to the commissioners before they weigh in. So
Okay.
there may still be a very adequate opportunity in September to add to the process.
And the one thing I will say is that if the board gives us a recommendation, while I think technically if you're beyond your time frame, we're not supposed to include it.
Well, that's what I know. That's why I'm asking the question.
We will include it, and we will send it to the city council.
Oh,
So I can
okay.
promise you that. But you have to get it to us. That's always an issue.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, yes, please.
Hi. I was looking.
Please state your name and.
Anna Scaife on behalf of Councilmember Traeger. I was looking on the informational materials on the website, and it doesn't seem that the Brooklyn specific slide is included in that deck. Would it be possible to circulate that to the board?
Yeah. Yes, I don't see an issue with that. Yes, because it was a citywide presentation, I didn't include this detail.
I'm sorry, my name is Ashley Thompson from Councilmember Mealy's office. Can I ask why you didn't include it?
Sorry, I missed the question.
I'm asking why was it not included? My name is Ashley Thompson. I'm from Councilmember Mealy's
The
office.
Brooklyn map?
Yes.
Because it's the presentation that I gave at the City Planning Commission, and there's a limited amount of time. It's the entire city. So there is a map of the entire city, but I didn't break it down by borough because I brought a borough map here because that's your primary interest, but at the City Planning Commission, I kept it more general. They also receive more detailed materials.
Is it possible we can?
Yes, I just said that I'm happy to share it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it'll be shared here, and then we could e-blast it out to every member of the Borough Board.
Perfect.
Do we have any additional questions from Borough Board members at this time? We open questions to the floor. Questions. Please come forward, take a mic, state your name and your question.
Okay, cool, thank you. State my name? Okay. Armand.
If you're from an organization, or if you're if you're one of the borough president's constituents, just say that.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Armando Moritz-Chapelican. I'm with the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development. I had a couple questions, but I will pare it down. So I guess it was brought up about how the M-designated districts overlap with the city's industrial business zones, and I guess just a clarification, are there any existing zoning protections right now for the industrial business zones?
Specific zoning protections you're asking for?
Yeah, is there any zoning mapped out for the industrial business zones as it exists right now?
Industrial business zones is not a zoning program.
Okay, cool.
So in that sense, no, because industrial business zones don't exist, our tax program, and don't exist in zoning currently.
Okay. And I guess on that then, in terms of industrial manufacturing versus the self-storage, different competing industry interests, it seems like the mayor's industrial action plan was going towards addressing the needs of industrial manufacturing businesses, keeping them in the city and all of that. Isn't it true that one of the reasons why businesses often leave the city is because of rising real estate prices? So my question would be, would this proposed action targeting the industrial business zones help address that issue?
The goal of the program is to deal with land use. It doesn't deal with the price of property. The concern was that these businesses are not creating jobs. Mm-hmm. And so we want to reserve land for things that create jobs. It has nothing to do with the price of land.
Okay.
And zoning cannot control the price of land. That's not what zoning does. Zoning controls land use contract.
Okay. And my last question. So on the discussion about facilities, self-storage facilities being cited then in M or C8 areas that are not included in the M designated districts, did DCP do any sort of study of how many more or less facilities there would be as a result of the action versus if there was no action taken? And if you could elaborate on that, it'd be helpful.
Yes, we looked at it, and we imagined, or we projected that there would be a similar rate of growth in the coming decade as there has been in the last decade. There have been many self-storage facilities opening in the last decade, so it made sense to assume that that would continue in the future. But even over the last decade, the split between the number of self-storage facilities developed in IBZs and the number of self-storage facilities developed outside of them was about 1 to 4. So 2 out of 8 facilities were typically developed in IBZs. So the majority, or 6 out of 8 facilities in the past, have been developed outside of these areas, which is not to say that this isn't an important measure. We think it will facilitate, will allow that these crucial sites that self-storage tends to occupy in industrial business zones are increasingly available to industrial and more job-intensive businesses. But it also means that we don't expect that there would be a sudden rush of self-storage facilities occurring in other places where the special permit is not proposed.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions?
I have a question for Community Board 7. Has a question for Ingrid and Richard. Are we voting tonight? No.
No.
Good.
All right, any final questions? So that concludes our business tonight related to the special permit for this storage facilities in the industrial business zone text amendment. The Borough Board will be asked to take on a position on this matter, and we were doing it with conducting a public hearing and vote. The intent is to do that at our July meeting. Afterwards, had the opportunity, hopefully, to hear from all the community boards that would like to take a position on this matter. And again, if you're not one of the boards that was referred the item, feel free to reach out to City Planning to get a presentation, get the materials. I will be available to you to give you technical assistance as well. I'll be consulting with you to learn your outcome, to help develop a Borough Board resolution that we could vote on. And so, move forward.
And I want to thank you, Richard, and I would like to thank the members from City Planning for joining us this evening with your presentation. Now, we can actually go to the first item on our agenda. So I want to thank all of the council member representatives who graced us tonight with your presence so we can move forward. So tonight's first agenda item is to authorize the proposed land sale of Flatbush Caton Market pursuant to Section 384B4 of the New York City Charter of the property located at 794 Flatbush Avenue, Flatbush, Brooklyn, block number 5063, lot number 58. Representatives of the Department of the New York City Economic Development Corporation are here tonight and will be available to take questions from the Borough Board members. We want to welcome Binga Dawadu. Please come to the podium and state your name, title for the record.
Thank you. My name is Benga Dawdu, and I'm an assistant vice president with the real estate group at EDC. I'm joined here today by Kenyatta McLean, who's a senior project manager within the government and community relations group, also at EDC. Also in attendance with us, I am here today seeking the board's approval for the disposition of city-owned property to NYC LDC for sale through NYC EDC to BRP Caton Flats LLC or an affiliate entity. The site, located at the intersection of Flatbush and Caton Avenues, is approximately 32,000 square feet. It is currently improved with approximately 8,000 square feet of a one-story structure that currently houses the Flatbush Caton Market. In addition to that, it also has approximately 24,000 square foot municipal parking lot which is managed by the New York City DOT. The vendor market was established in 2000 as an open-air market by former council member Dr. Una Clark. In 2001, construction commenced for a permanent building for the merchants, and the market was reopened or officially opened in 2002. Since then, the vendor market has provided an off-street business location at affordable rates for former street vendors and other entrepreneurs in the area. The city and EDC identified the potential to transform the site into a mixed-use development while retaining and improving the vendor market to support the long-term growth and vitality of its vendors. In October of 2015, EDC issued a request for proposal that required, amongst other things, the following: construction of a mixed-use building with 100% affordable housing with commercial uses, including a new vendor market, community facility use, as well as encouraging the creation of office space for CACI, who is the manager of the current market. In addition to that, it was also required that there be proposals to relocate the existing vendors in the market during and also after construction. In addition to abiding by these requirements, the purchaser has agreed to do more than that. In order to limit the impact of relocation and resettlement, the purchaser has agreed to provide free rent for 1 year at the temporary market to cover the cost of business development and training while the vendors are at the temporary space, and also to cover the move-in expenses related to the relocation efforts. With regards to the program, the purchaser proposes to construct an approximately 278,000 square foot mixed-use building, which will be comprised of approximately 250 units of affordable housing with community facility space in the form of an incubator space for small businesses and office space for CACI, ground floor retail, as well as a new vendor market and below-grade parking. Construction is anticipated to commence shortly after closing, which is anticipated to occur in the winter of 2017-2018. And subject to force majeure, construction is contemplated to be complete within 3 years. In closing, I'm seeking the Borough Board's approval for the disposition of the site to NYC LDC for sale through NYC EDC, ultimately to the purchaser or an affiliate entity for the purposes described. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to open up the floor to Borough Board members for questions, and I would like to also introduce my colleague, Ryan Lynch, who will participate in this portion, Kenyatta McLean, Renee Castertano, please come forward, and John Johnson Pete. Please come forward, and if you have any questions, they'll all be happy to assist you.
So it's Benga, Kenyatta, Renee, and James.
Did I call him John? I'm sorry, James.
He looks like a John.
You look like a John, no. John Johnson. Yeah, that's what I did. I converted it to John Johnson instead of James. So do we have any questions from Borough Board members? Please state your name and your question. Thank you.
Najani Granville Community Board 8. You said something about free rent for a year, you said?
Yes, so the purchaser has agreed to provide free rent to the vendors while they're at the temporary market space for 1 year.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions at all from, yes, please state your name and pose your question. Thank you.
My name is Julie Dent from Community Board 4. And I just need to know, will there be any 421A attached to this?
No, it's anticipated that it'll be in Article 11 because it's 100% affordable development.
Thank you so much.
Do we have any other questions from Borough Board members? Would any members from the audience like to ask any questions at this time? Oh, yes, CB, please state your name.
7. I just,
State your name, please.
My name is Daniel Murphy.
I know your name, but one of it.
So, just curious about it's a lovely building, and I think it's great. 100% affordable housing is always a great thing, especially if it's really affordable. But I was wondering about the design, the environmental standards. If there was some environmental standards you were following, such as LEED, or some other environmental standards you were following in the design of the building.
My name is Renee Casartano. I work at BRP Development, and the building is anticipated to be LEED certified. And we also go through a program called Enterprise Green Communities. We work with the city on that, and that's part of the one of the requirements of one of the sources of financing we use for the project.
Is that LEED silver, gold, or platinum?
I don't know which metal will be. What's that? It's silver. All right.
Thank you.
At this point, it's LEED silver? Okay. All right.
Again, Julie Dent, Community Board 4. This is an afterthought. You indicated that it's 100% affordable. Are you going by the AMI when you say 100% affordable?
Yes, the AMI range is from 40% to 130%.
Ed Powell, Community Board 14. I think this is probably the third or fourth time that I've seen your presentation, but there is a question that keeps arising in my mind, and that is regarding notification that you've done to neighboring tenants and businesses. I know buildings on East 21st Street, the backs of those buildings, you know, well, those buildings, in fact, are impacted by the construction and even by the completed building as far as the shadow is concerned. And there are buildings, residential buildings across Caton Avenue, on the other side of Caton Avenue. What notifications and what interaction have you had with the tenants in those buildings?
Well, I'm sure that any notification requirements needed to construct the building would be adhered to by the developer. As I said before, construction is not anticipated to start until some point in the winter. With regards to notifications, I think the only notifications that have been done are with regards to the engagement efforts that we've had done thus far.
But I will just state that we, EDC, BRP, Urbane, we met with the members of the East 21st Street Block Association a few weeks ago in the Flatbush neighborhood, and we've had and we've committed to, you know, ongoing communication via the community board, via a website that we're in the process of designing to, you know, keep everyone informed of construction timeline and you know, those impacts that that may be, you know, may be a result of the construction.
The current, Janice Morgan, Community Board 16. The current market has parking. Are any of the parking spaces going to be restored via maybe an underground parking method? Okay. And also, it states here that there's going to be 250 units of affordable housing, a new market office space for the Caribbean African American Chamber of Commerce, an incubator space for small businesses and entrepreneurs, and commercial retail space. So is the new market something separate from the incubator space? Are these all, you know, these, the commercial space, the market, the incubator space, those are all different components of the project?
Yes, James Justin Pyatt, Urban Development. Yes, they are different components, but from a spatial perspective, the market and the incubator are one space. and there'll be co-use. So there will be
Right.
some separation points because the incubator will have classroom space and things like that that don't necessarily match up with retail, but the vendors will be able to use both spaces, and certainly members from the community can use the incubator space as well. The commercial spaces are separate though, so that's going to be facing on Flatbush, and those will be separate enterprises that aren't connected to the market.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other? Yes, please. State your name.
Najani Granville, Community Board 8.
Thank you.
Is there any possibility at some point in time that this would cease to be a market, that somebody could actually tear it down and build something else?
So in our deeds, there are restrictions that will be applied. So it's going to be a market for a long time.
Matthew Pitt from Councilmember Lori Campbell's office. Those below-grade parking spaces, are they available to the public or to people who live in the units?
I believe they'll be available to people within the building as well as the public.
Sorry, you opened up the floodgates. In the deed restrictions.
Say your name, please.
I'm sorry, my name is Daniel Murphy, Community Board 7. In the deed restrictions, is the affordable housing in perpetuity?
With regards to the affordable housing, it'll be pursuant to the regulatory agreement with HPD and HDC, which has requirements for long-term affordability.
Long-term is not a legal term. In the restriction, does it say that the housing shall be affordable in perpetuity?
I think there are some units that may likely be into perpetuity, but not necessarily all of them.
Well, then the question would be how long?
Again, I don't want to speak for HPD, but I believe in the past it's been for upwards of 30+ years.
Do we have any other questions from board members? Would anyone from the audience like to ask any questions? We have a board member. Please state your name and your board is your question.
My name is Richard Flatto. I'm the chair for Community Board 3. Could you tell us what the current zoning is for that site?
Sure. The zoning was changed to an R88 with a C24 overlay.
How long ago was it changed?
We just finished Euler about a month ago.
Do we have any other questions from anyone at all at this time? So I would like to thank the members from EDC for making their presentation this evening, but it does require a vote. CB 14 and the members of City Council will be able to vote on this action, as well as the Office of the Brooklyn Borough President. So I will ask Keisha to take a roll call, please. May I have a motion? I guess I need a motion to, hold on, let me make sure I get the motion right. Here it is. We'd like to have a motion to authorize the proposed land sale of the Flatbush Caton Market pursuant to Section 384B4 of the New York City Charter of the property located at 794 Flatbush Avenue, Flatbush, Brooklyn, block number 5063, lot 58. Could people who are allowed to vote, please, one of you make a motion? Move it.
I make a motion.
Who was that?
Councilmember Gentili's office.
Thank you. Could someone please second it?
Brian Ellicott from Councilmember Menchaca's office will second.
Thank you. So we'll do a roll call vote. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Matthew Eugene.
This is Ethan Tucker on behalf of Matthew Eugene. I vote aye.
Councilmember Cumbo.
Aye. Aye.
Councilmember Gentili.
Aye.
Councilmember Greenfield.
Aye.
Councilmember Mealy.
Aye.
Councilmember Mark Traeger.
Aye.
Councilmember Williams.
Abstain.
Community Board 14.
Ed Powell, first Vice Chair of Community Board 14, votes aye.
Okay. Borough President's Office.
Ingrid P. Lewis Martin, representing Brooklyn Borough President Eric L. Adams. Aye. Unanimously moved and approved. Thank you. So that concludes our business related to the Flatbush Cape Market. Tonight's fourth agenda item is a presentation by the Prospect Park Alliance on Lefferts Historic House and Pathways for the Northeast Perimeter Renovation. Representatives from the Prospect Park Alliance are here tonight to explain their renovation project to restore the Lefferts Historic House and the reconstruction of paths in the northeast perimeter to improve access. So we want to welcome Sheena Enriquez, Alden Madre, and Kristen Zimmerman. Please come forward to the podium, state your name and title for the record.
Good evening. My name is Alden Madry. I work as an architect for Prospect Park. We have two projects that we're going to present today. The first one is the restoration of our Lefferts house, which, as you may know, is just off of Flatbush Avenue within the park. It was moved to the park in 1918. And it's one of the 23 historic houses in the Parks Department Historic House Trust Division. And this project was funded by the Brooklyn delegation of the City Council. And I'm going to turn it over to Sheena Enriquez, another architect in our office, who's going to go over the details of the project.
Thank you, Alden. Hi, I'm Sheena Enriquez, and the renovation of the Lefferts house. Here's an image of the Lefferts house I took last week. It's a great example of a Dutch colonial style house that would have been found in the area and around Long Island and New Jersey starting from the 17th century when Dutch settlers came to the U.S. What's notable about this structure, the Dutch colonial structures, is the gambrel roof with these curved eaves. You see the shape of the roof, and it comes down and it flares out over that porch. Currently, the museum is managed by the Prospect Park Alliance. It's a historic house museum that houses historical artifacts, and the staff at the Prospect Park Alliance also hosts activities that show visitors aspects of rural life in the area prior to the 19th century, on top of other activities within and outside of the house. Here it is located in the park near the Empire Boulevard entrance. It's located in the Children's Corner, which also contains the Carousel and Prospect Park Zoo. Some background about the house. So it was originally owned by the Lefferts families since the original Lefferts came from Holland in the 17th century. The original location was on Flatbush Avenue at 563 Flatbush Avenue, and generations of the Lefferts family lived in this house until 1918 when they donated the house to the city. So here's an image during that year when the house was picked up from its original location and moved into Prospect Park. So some of the existing conditions of the house now. The roof shingles are in poor condition. These shingles were installed about 26 years ago in 1991, and there was a complete overhaul of the roof, and now it's about the end of the life of these wood shingles, so we're proposing to replace them. The shingles at the walls, too, you can see they're in poor condition as well. The windows and doors need some TLC. There's also a window well at the side of the house that's currently covered, but if you look, the photo on the left is an image of the basement where some of the staff uses the space to prep for activities for the public, and currently there's no daylight down there, so one of the improvements would be to let light access the basement through that window well. The front and rear porch, you could see the paint and the wood needs some care. An ADA ramp was installed in the early 90s. The posts are now rotting, so that needs repair as well. You could see in these images of the cellar, it's a dirt and stone floor. Water infiltrates the cellar, and it also brings unwanted moisture into the house, which is mainly a wooden structure. So it's causing issues with rot in the wood. As you can see, here is some structural framing at the basement, and they're in poor shape as well. This is currently the staff bathroom. At the interior of the house, the original floorboards are in need of repair. The door saddles in between rooms are too high. Per ADA, they need to be shorter than that, so if someone's in a wheelchair, they'll have a hard time getting through the space. Currently, there's no lighting on the house, so this is the view. If you're standing at night, standing at Flatbush Avenue, it's in shadows. If you're standing from the park looking at the house, there's some security lighting that's been added. Also, entering the house area, the path the asphalt path is in poor shape as well. So we're proposing to improve all those conditions at the roof, replace the roof shingles, repair and repaint the wall shingles, repair and repaint the doors, windows, trim and shutters, add a protective grate at that window well I mentioned earlier, repair that ADA ramp, add a new concrete slab and deal with the way the water infiltrates the cellar, but find a way to get it out of the cellar so the house doesn't have these moisture issues. Repair the first floor wood framing. We're already working with a structural engineer to figure out how we can repair the wood joists that are supporting the first floor of the house. So currently there's staff that works in part of the house and they don't have AC, so it's really tough for them to work in the summer. So we're looking to add AC to some of the spaces that they work, as well as the museum management collection on the second floor of the house. We would like to add AC up there as well. We're looking to upgrade the staff bathroom so they have an actual hand sink and not just a slop sink, make it ADA accessible, more comfortable for them. At this site, we're looking to add new lighting to illuminate the house and also illuminate the path to the house so when people have to leave or come and go after dark, they feel safer. They don't have to walk through a dark wooded area to get out of the park. Also at this site, I mentioned earlier, the asphalt path, we will repave it. And I mentioned the new AC, it does require condenser units. So you see on the right of this image, there's a little space where we're gonna put the units sort of behind some plantings so no one will really notice that they're there. Here's an image of that area. So it'll be behind some plantings. And the image of the condenser unit. You've seen these on the fronts of buildings. So that's the proposed improvements on Lefferts House. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from board members? Please state your name and pose your question.
Teresa Scavo, Community Board 15. How much money's been allocated for this project?
$2.5 million.
For the entire project?
Yes.
Thank you. The Brooklyn delegation.
Julie, Community Board 4. And where's the money coming from? Is it the
money is coming from the Brooklyn delegation of the City Council.
Nothing from the Parks Department?
No.
Doris Cruz, Community Board 10. What is the existing heat and how do you plan to, you said you're adding extra heat?
So the existing heat in the house only serves the first floor, and it's, I believe, a gas-fired furnace that feeds through just air vents. And then the proposed additional heat are local ductless mini splits, which basically look like little boxes that are mounted to the wall.
What is the energy source?
Oh, the energy source? Electricity.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Richard Flatow, Community Board 3. What's the square footage of the building?
The square footage. Off the top of my head, I don't know the total square footage, but we are remembering 6,000 to 8,000 total. So there's a cellar space, first floor, and a partial second floor.
Julie did CB4. Just an afterthought, who is responsible for the upkeep of the building so the conditions wouldn't get to the point that it's at now? Because sometimes if there's someone really there to upkeep the building, it wouldn't get to the condition. It's so sad that that building looks like that. It should have never
So I
gone
think
to
I
that
can,
point.
maybe Alden or Christian wants to add to that. Some of the items on the building, say the roof, a cedar shingle roof lasts about 20 to 25 years. And that's why we don't really, but the other items, maybe you can.
I can say a little bit about it. I mean, normally we rely on the Parks Department for major maintenance. If the boiler goes down or the furnace, we'll call it in to Brooklyn Shops, which is a division of the Parks Department. But as you know, they're servicing all of the parks buildings in Brooklyn, so what happens sometimes is the buildings don't get as much maintenance as they need, unfortunately.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes. Janice Morgan, CB16. What events is the house used to hold events, or is it just used as a prep area for events in the park?
From my understanding of what happens at the house, there's a historic house museum where people visit and see sort of the artifacts of people living there. And then there are also events outside of the house. And can you guys think of...
And let me just jump in for a second. They also do workshops there. It's actually one of our best kept secrets. And I would just like to ask the question before you answer that as well. The 2.5 that you're receiving, is that enough to do all of the renovations?
That will be good enough to do these renovations, which will keep the house for another 20 years probably. What the main thing we're trying to accomplish is to sort of fix the exterior enclosure and make it watertight and to sort of improve the comfort level of the house. On the activities, we have a lot of kids groups that come, a lot of school groups. We've had weekend days where we have 1,000 people at the house. So, you know, we have a lot of activity going on here, and it's open to the public also.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You have a question? Yes.
Brian Ellicott from Councilmember Menchaca's office. You had a slide about lights because of the darkness. From what I saw from your slide, is that going to be enough lighting, or like, do you know what that's going to look like?
We have a good idea. We have a lighting designer on board, and it's funny because the different sides of the house, we have different concerns. On the Flatbush side, what we'd like to do is light up the house a little so people will notice it. It's on this main avenue. So we went down to the King Manor in Jamaica, and they, on the Jamaica Avenue side, put these lights that really sort of showcase the house. That's what we want to do on the Flatbush side. But on the other side of the house, our main concern is security for the staff, because in the winter they'll exit at night, and they've had incidents where people have been sort of standing out there. You're turning your back to lock the door in the house, and you really want enough light to feel like you can safely leave the building.
So my follow-up question is, it's both for safety and for visible showing of the house?
Yes, yeah, it's
Okay.
both.
Doris Cruz, CB10. This is a Prospect Park Alliance project. What role does the Parks Department play? Do they review your plans, and who's responsible for the maintenance of the house?
Yeah, the Parks Department, we go through 3 to 4 reviews with them before we come to you. So we go to the architecture team, we go to the Brooklyn team, and eventually we go to Commissioner Silver, who's the head of the Parks Department. In addition to, reviews with the Parks Department, we're also going to go to Landmarks, Preservation Commission, and we'll go to the Building Department after this. What was your second question?
Who does the maintenance?
So for the minor maintenance at the house, our staff can do those kind of tasks, but for major work, like we've had a water main under the house break, and we had to rely on the Parks Department shops, so that's the Parks Department. So we can handle minor maintenance. We have a staff member who handles that at the boathouse and at Lefferts and some of our other buildings.
Thank you.
Ed Powell, Community Board 14. Maybe I missed this, but is the upper floor ADA compliant currently?
No.
Okay.
It's the only way to get to the upper floor are stairs.
Are you, will these changes address that at all?
What's that?
With the changes that you propose, will that address that?
We're not adding an elevator to the building. The problem would that would cost so much, and most of the museum spaces are on the lower level. So it's the upper floors are used mainly as storage spaces.
Okay. And second part of my question, I guess, is to Christian. It's notwithstanding the condition of the building, it's a very charming old building. Will these changes affect the original architecture of the building?
Christian Zimmerman, I'm a landscape architect, but I'm also the Vice President for Capital and Landscape Management for the Prospect Park Alliance. The building has been altered a number of times throughout the generations, so it's not fully the original building. But we're not altering it again. And also, just to let you know, we don't allow access to the second floor right now because it's a house and it's not structurally set up to bring in a lot of people. Like the joists are far apart. There's just some structural things. In the future, we'd love to be able to do that, but we'll have to do this whole structural change, within the support system. But that's really long term. Right now, we're really trying to take care of the skin, the facade, and really tighten that up and just create some of those. And the other thing I wanted to add about it's a children's house museum. We get over 60,000. It's one of the most popular historic houses in the city. We get over 60,000 people attending our events. We coordinate events with the library. We have nighttime reading programs. We have baking. We have an outdoor brick oven. We do that. So it's a very active space. And right across from it is the carousel. So we call this area the children's corner. You got the entrance to the zoo. You've got the carousel. You've got Lefferts. So it's a very busy hub. So we're kind of saying, why don't we, get this thing a facelift and really make it happen?
And I noticed that a number of people are asking about who maintains it. The house is wood, so there's a natural deterioration that happens, and it's out in the elements. So after 20 or so years, it needs that again. We all know that the Parks Department ultimately has responsibility for it, but we also know that the Parks Department doesn't really get enough money that's needed to take care of all of the various structures in our park. So I want to commend the Alliance for having enough foresight to go to City Council to ask to have the renovation done. And I want to really commend the council members for honoring the request. It's a tremendous site. I grew up in that site. My son is 30. He grew up in that site. I'm a grandma. I plan on taking my granddaughter to that site, so I think it's awesome, and I really commend you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we really appreciate the funding. It's very important to us.
It is. So do we have, yes, please.
Najani Granville, Community Board 8. I'm just curious, how many people can legally be in the structure at one time?
I believe on the upper level, we limit it to maybe 8 people, but
amount.
the lower floor can accommodate more. I would say 25 to 30 people on the lower floor.
Most of the programming is outside. That's where we can get larger groups of people, but then they'll restrict access.
Richard Flato, Community Board 3. I'm sorry. How long will the time frame be for the construction, and how long will the house be closed down from the public?
So we're wrapping up the design documents right now. We'll turn those over to Parks, the Parks Department at the end of this summer. And normally for the procurement and bidding process, it takes the Parks Department about 1 year. And so we're looking at fall of next year to start construction, and I believe this would be able to be built in approximately a year. That's a standard construction span for a project of this size.
So do we have?
So that means you'll be closed for about a year then, right?
It looks like that.
Okay.
Do we have any additional questions before we move to vote? Okay, we don't need a roll call vote for this one. So would someone please make a motion to, hold on, let me go and find it. Somebody please make a motion to approve the design for the restoration of Lefferts House and the renovation of the pathways of the northeast perimeter. May I please have someone move?
We still have another presentation. It's a very short one, but the paths is a separate project.
Oh, okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So we could present that as well now, and then you vote together.
Do it now.
Yeah.
And we'll do it.
Yeah, it's a paths and drainage project. Not very sexy, but really important to us.
Okay, no worries. When she showed the path in the building design, I thought that was part of it, when you said you were going to put new asphalt.
Yeah. No. So we received $2 million from the mayor to restore this part, this path system. It's in the northeast section of our park. It's in what we call the northeast perimeter lands. We are focusing and really restoring this area. It needs a lot of help. The paths and drainage have collapsed a lot in this area. So it's right across from the library. It's near Grand Army Plaza. And it's a 27-acre overall site that we've been focusing on. As you can see here, we've been receiving funding to move forward on a lot of path work in this. The Flatbush Avenue project has been bid out, and we have a low bidder. So that was funded by the borough president and council member Lori Cumbo. So we hope to have that start construction this fall, maybe in August. We'll see. But the bids were under, so we don't have to go looking for more money. The Dongan Path project was part of the participatory budgeting plan. Brad Lander, councilman, he funded that. That's in construction right now. We're working with Parks Without Borders, doing 2 new entrances in this area. That's in design. That will be coming your way probably in the fall in the design. And then this project is the one where you see where it says paths in the northeast. So it's really connecting an area where the Endale Arch is. connecting to the Dongan Path where the Zucker Natural Exploration Area is, that wooden kind of sculptural. So it's all infrastructure, but it's all really needed. It's part of the original design, the path. We're not realigning it. It is part of the original design by Olmsted and Box. It had beautiful rustic arbors. We'd like to bring that back someday, but that's, and this is the children's pool. This is actually where our goats are. If you ever heard about our goats doing invasive removal, this is the area that they're working. So it was this beautiful place. And this is what it is now. The path system has many different layers. It's just broken down. If you have a stroller, you can't come here with a wheelchair, crutches, even just walking. It's a very rough area in that, and there aren't any lights. So it's completely dark. So the idea is to pick up the path, reconstruct it, reconstruct all of the drainage, and then add all new lights. So we'll be working with DOT on that. So it'll be the B9 poles, the park poles that we use everywhere, and fix all the drainage and add benches, amenities, garbage cans. So you'll see in Central Park, settees is our bench. So it's a pretty straightforward project, but it's $2 million for path work. That gets us a long way. So it's really, really great. Any questions?
Any questions? So I'm going to combine it so we can do one vote. Is that all right? Okay. So may I have a motion to approve the design for the restoration of the Lefferts house and the renovations to the pathways of the northeast perimeter? Could you say your name, please?
Teresa Scavo, CB15, motion to approve.
Thank you, Teresa. May I please have a second?
Second, Julie Dent, CB4.
Thank you, Teresa and Julie. So all those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any abstentions? Any against? Motion carries. I want to thank you for coming with the presentation, and best of luck to you, and great job. Now, move on. So that ends our presentation from the Prosper Park Alliance. So do any of our members have any old business that they would like to bring forth at this time? Once, twice, two times? Any new business? Once, twice, two times? Our next meeting will be July 11th, 2017 at 6 p.m. May I have a motion to adjourn? Say your name, please.
Teresa Scavo, CB15, motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Second?
Najani Granville, CB8.
Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. All those against? Any abstentions? All right, thank you so much. And thank you guys for coming to give us quorum.